On today's show, now that the dust of free agency has settled, where do the Cavs rank amongst the Eastern Conference's best teams? And how many of those teams do we think can actually win the title in 2026? We'll talk about all that and so much more on today's edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name is Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like my Substack, The Inside Shot, Cleveland Magazine, 92.3 The Fan, and a number of other stops along the way. I want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. Make sure to drop us a 5-star rating, leave us a nice review, and of course, be a friend. Tell a friend about the show. If you're watching on YouTube, do us a favor too. Hit that thumbs up button for us, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And of course, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, because right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's right. That is $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. As I mentioned on yesterday's show, a lot of the dust across the NBA has settled. There are still certainly moves that will be made between now and the start of the season, but a vast majority of them that will take place have taken place to this point. And I do think that right now is a good opportunity, a good time on the calendar to sort of take a look at where the Cavs exactly stand in the Eastern Conference. Of course, they last year finished as the top overall seed in the Eastern Conference before fizzling out in the second round of the playoffs in what I think certainly was an unexpected and unfortunate manner for the team. And I do think that it is very easy to allow what happened in the postseason last year really cloud the way that we think of what the Cavs should be this upcoming season. And I understand that. I think it makes sense to an extent, but I do wonder if a little bit of that is overblown. So I do want to go through the Eastern Conference teams 1 through 15 on this show, but I do want to spend a good chunk of the first segment talking about where the Cavs are, because I'm going to just come out and say, and this is not going to be a surprise to anybody, I have the Cavaliers as the top team in the Eastern Conference. I think that they are the team that is best suited to, one, be able to win a lot of games during the regular season. I think we have seen that for several years in a row, that the Cavs are going to be a good regular season team, even if there have been times, really, I think in 2 of the last 3 years, where they have underperformed their regular season in the postseason. But they are a team that at the very least is built for regular season success. Like, as I look at this, it is difficult for me right now to imagine, unless things go disastrously wrong, it's really challenging for me to envision the Cavs not getting a top 2 seed in the East. Like, I just don't see many other teams that are capable of winning as many games as the Cavs are capable of winning. And I think that's evidenced by the fact that they do have the highest win total over with our friends at FanDuel. Their win total set at 55.5 games, which I believe is the second highest in the NBA and is the highest in the Eastern Conference. The only team with a higher win total, you guessed it, Oklahoma City, who projects to be a very, very good team yet again after they won the title this June. They are the odds-on favorites to win it next June as well, which I think is exactly where they should be. But in also looking at some of the other stuff on FanDuel, the Cavs right now, and this has fluctuated throughout free agency, and I didn't want to necessarily touch on it a ton while a lot of the moving and shaking was happening, because I do think that odds at that time can be a little volatile, right? Like, they can fluctuate quite a bit, but they've settled now, and I don't expect them to change very much between now and the start of the regular season. But the Cavs on FanDuel at this moment, as I record this, it is 2:32 in the afternoon on Tuesday, July 22nd. The Cavs are plus 750 to win the NBA championship on FanDuel. The only team with better odds to win the title is Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City's odds are significantly better. There is a pretty significant gap between where the Cavs are at plus 750 and where the Oklahoma City Thunder are at plus 240, but there's no team in between them. The Cavs are alone with the second best odds to win the title. Now, you might ask, okay, well, this is more of a power ranking about the Eastern Conference teams. Where did the Cavs rank there? Well, if they're second to win the NBA title, of course, that means they are first. They are the odds-on favorites right now at FanDuel to win the Eastern Conference at plus 240. After that is the New York Knicks at plus 260, then the Orlando Magic at plus 550, the Atlanta Hawks at plus 950, and then it gets to some significant long shots with Philadelphia plus 1200, Detroit plus 1300, Boston, Milwaukee, Indy, Miami, Toronto, Chicago, and so on and so forth. So I do think that for the most part, those odds are right. Now, there are some teams that maybe I disagree with the spot that they're at, but I do think that the Cavs should be looked at as a team that is the favorite to win the East. And there's been a lot of conversation. What is the thing that you have heard the most about the Eastern Conference this offseason? It's the East is wide open, right? I don't see it that way. Like, to me, if the East were wide open, I think that should mean there are like 8 teams that if you said, yeah, that team is going to win the East this year, you wouldn't be surprised by it. And I think right now, that list for me is at maybe 3 teams, right? Like, I don't think that the East is as wide open as it has been rumored to be. I think I look at this and say, yeah, the Cavs are the favorites, but they've not proven things in the postseason the way that they should have proven things in the postseason. The New York Knicks are right up there, and they went to a conference finals, but they just fired their coach. And then after that, it's okay, well, the Orlando Magic, we don't really know what they're going to look like. We know they're going to be good, but we don't know exactly what they're going to look like. The Atlanta Hawks sort of in a similar boat. And then after that, I think there's a significant drop off between 4 and 5. So I do think that the East being wide open has become a bit of an overblown talking point. I don't know that it's necessarily quite as true as that phrase is making it out to be. If a team other than the Cavs or Knicks won the conference this year, I think a lot of people would be surprised. If a team other than the Cavs, Knicks, Magic, or Hawks won the conference this year, I think everybody would be stunned. So I don't know that the East is quite as wide open as we want it to be, or as the world wants it to be. And I do think that is part of the reason why I've got the Cavs as the top team in the East right now, because I do think if I look on paper at this team, and I understand basketball games are not played on paper, they're played on hardwood. But if I look on paper at this Cavs team, I don't know of another team that has a better top 2 in the Eastern Conference right now when you consider guys that are injured. Like, because you could say, well, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, that is the best top 2 in the Eastern Conference. And you would be right about that. However, Jason Tatum's not going to play basketball this year because of his torn Achilles tendon, and the Boston Celtics, because of that, are not going to be a threat. So that is something that you look at and say, okay, well, that doesn't necessarily count. You could go at Indiana, whoever their second best players, and say, well, Tyrese Haliburton also not going to play because of a torn Achilles tendon. I look at this and say, okay, well, what duo in the Eastern Conference is better than Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley? Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns are, I think, in that conversation. But personally, I would pick Donovan Mitchell over Jalen Brunson, considering he's coming off of a first-team All-NBA season where he finished 5th in MVP voting. And I think last year, Evan Mobley was better than Karl Anthony Towns. And I do think that that's not going to change, because while Karl, I think, is an outstanding basketball player, I'm not sure that he's still getting better. And I know Evan Mobley is still getting better. So I would take the Cavs duo over that duo. And then we could push it further on to, okay, well, who is the best triumvirate of players? Which team has the best 3 players? Same thing applies to Boston with Derek White adding in, because Jason Tatum not going to play. If you want to talk about maybe OG Anunoby is the 3rd best player in the Knicks, or Mikal Bridges is the 3rd best player in the Knicks, I think there's an argument to be made there, but I don't think either one of those guys is better than Darius Garland. So what a lot of this is going to come down to, as it always does, is going to come down to health, because that is exactly what happened last year for the Cavs, right? Like, the Indiana Pacers won that series in part because they played better than the Cavs, but part of it also was the Cavs were dealing with some significant injuries. And at that time, the Indiana Pacers were the much healthier basketball team. And I don't like to boil it down to just that much, because while so often it is the team that can be the healthiest at the end wins, that is a very true thing. I like to think the actual basketball stuff matters. And the Cavs got beat at the actual basketball stuff last year, in addition to being the team that wasn't quite as healthy. So that is something to think about there. But I don't look at the New York Knicks and say, yeah, that team is better on paper than the Cavs right now. I don't look at that. And of course, Mike Brown, as a head coach who is going into his, I believe, 5th head coaching job in the NBA, when you count the Cavs twice, the Lakers, and then, of course, the Sacramento Kings, where he has had varying degrees of success at each stop. Certainly not the second Cavs stop, but the first Cavs stop was very successful. But he is somebody that I think is a lot like Tom Thibodeau, where he is a very good coach, but he has not been able to get over the hump in the postseason the way that you would expect. And sure, the same questions can be raised about Kenny Atkinson, but as I look at the top of the East right now, I think it is the Cavs, and I think there's a little gap between them and the Knicks. And then after that, I think there's a significant gap between the Knicks and whoever is next, whether you want to have Atlanta, whether you want to have Indiana, or not Indiana, excuse me, whether you want to have Orlando. Those teams, I think, are just a little step below New York, and I think they're certainly a step below Cleveland. So right now, I do think the Cavs belong as the top team in the Eastern Conference. I think that's how they will enter this season. They are the favorites on FanDuel. I don't expect that to change. That's part of the reason why I have them at the top of my power rankings. And another big part of the reason why is because Evan Mobley, I think, is somebody that is going to take another significant step forward this year. Okay, so we know I've got the Cavs at the top of the East. Well, what exactly does the rest of the conference look like as far as my power rankings go? We'll dive into that next right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is, of course, America's #1 sportsbook. And I've talked a lot about FanDuel in this episode because I do also think FanDuel is the most accurate sportsbook when it comes to putting the numbers on the long-term futures, as we've just got done talking about in the first segment. And right now, with FanDuel, you can bet on all the things that I've talked about. Those odds are real. You can go look up Cavs plus 240 to win the East, Cavs plus 750, to win the NBA Finals. All that's available, but maybe you just want something that's not quite as far down the road because we're not going to know until the end of May, at the very least, if one of those things is going to come true. But right now, summer sports are in full swing. And whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it just a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. Getting sunburned is not very fun. It is certainly not exciting. It just pales in comparison to what FanDuel brings you. Maybe you like FanDuel because one of the things that you can do is you can track your favorite matchups with the app, keeping it fresh with daily new promotions and fun new ways to bet. And right now, if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. That's right. If you bet just $5 and you're a new FanDuel customer, you get $150 in bonus bets if that bet wins. Open up the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com. That is FanDuel.com today to get started. Thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. Like I said earlier, you can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. Make sure to drop us a 5-star rating, leave us a nice review, and of course, be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. And the Cavs, as I mentioned, I have as the #1 team in my Eastern Conference power rankings moving forward. I do think when we start to get a lot of these national lists, when we start to get a lot of the power rankings that will, I imagine, start coming out at the start of September. So in about a month and a half from now, the Cavs will be maybe not unanimously the top team in the East, but I think the consensus will be that they are the top team in the East going into this season. I've got the New York Knicks as the second best team in the East going into this season. And I think what New York did, while a little bit maybe overblown going to the conference finals, considering I don't know that they can look at themselves, or I shouldn't say that. I do not think the Knicks looked at what they did last year as a sustainable thing. I don't. Because I don't think, and the Knicks had not been to the conference finals in over 20 years. So it was a very big accomplishment for that organization to get back to the conference finals for the first time in more than a generation, right? And that's nothing to sneeze at. But the fact that they, after getting to the conference finals, and I never thought that they were going to be able to beat Indiana in that series. As soon as the Pacers got done with the Cavs, I said, that is a team that is going to the NBA Finals because they're that good. And I was never really a big believer in the New York Knicks. But I think if an organization gets to the conference finals and then fires their coach, they don't necessarily believe that that was all that real of a postseason run. And I sort of think that is where the New York Knicks are at right now. I don't know that they necessarily believe that they are that close to winning a title, right? Because if you are that close to winning a title, you don't fire your coach. You fire your coach when you come up short. And the Knicks last year, I don't think it was fair to say, yes, for New York this year, it is finals or bust with the way that their regular season went, where if you think back to the regular season, what did they do in all their big games? They went 0-4 against the Cavs. They went 0-4 against the Celtics. They went 0-2 against the Oklahoma City Thunder. The knock on New York going into the postseason, while they won, I believe it was 51 games last year, none of those wins were all that impressive against the best teams in the NBA. And I think that the Knicks probably view what their regular season was last year a little bit more real than what their postseason was last year. Because yes, they beat the Detroit Pistons in a series that everybody picked them to win. And then they beat the Boston Celtics when they had a few 20-point comebacks, which I don't think you can necessarily always count on happening, while the Boston Celtics were dealing with some significant injuries too. And I'm not just talking about the Jason Tatum Achilles injury, because I do think that the series was kind of decided by that point. The Knicks were going to go up 3-1 in that game, no matter what happened with Tatum's Achilles at the end of it there. But Jaylen Brown needing an offseason knee surgery. Obviously, Kristaps Porzingis not being anywhere near 100%. I think that they looked at it and said, we kind of beat the dollar store version of the Boston Celtics. I still expect them to have a good season this year, and I think that they should be near the Cavs as far as the betting odds go. And I've got them second in the East, and that's not a bad place to be whatsoever. FanDuel has them as slight underdogs behind the Cavs at plus 260 to win the conference. And my number 3 team in the power rankings, I go with the Atlanta Hawks here. I do like what the Hawks did this offseason. Now, I've got some questions as far as, well, how sustainable is what they're going to do. And the other thing, I have a giant question mark about Jalen Johnson, because I think everything they did this summer really puts a lot of the eggs into Jalen Johnson's going to be an all-star type of guy. And he had a very good first half of the year last year prior to the shoulder injury that cost him the entire second half of the season. So FanDuel has Atlanta with the 4th best odds to win the Eastern Conference at plus 950. They're behind the Cavs, the New York Knicks, and the Orlando Magic, who I will talk about coming up in a second. But I think everything Atlanta did this summer means that they need their best player next year to not be Trae Young. They need their best player to be Jalen Johnson. And Trae Young is a very good player. I think he is sort of one of the guys that, as I kind of talked about with Dean Wade on yesterday's show, he has fluctuated between overrated and underrated at certain times in his career. I do think he's at the point in his career now where he's a great playmaker. He's a terrific passer, but he's just not, he's not proven to be in the NBA a good enough shooter to warrant some of the shots that he takes. And I think that is Atlanta's one of their biggest issues. And the other big issue, it's something that we talk about with Darius Garland, and the big difference between winning with a small guard, winning with a small guard like Garland versus winning with a small guard like Trae Young is Darius Garland is the 3rd best player on the Cavs. If Trae Young was a team's 3rd best player, and I'm not even saying Darius Garland is better than Trae Young, but if Darius Garland is a team's 3rd best player versus Trae Young being your best player at that size, I think that is something that creates a lot of issues, because I don't know if your best player can be a small guard the way Trae Young is, where I think when you look at the Cavs' best player right now being Donovan Mitchell, who is a much bigger, stronger, and I know that height isn't necessarily that big of a difference, but he is a bigger guard than what Trae Young is. I think that small difference makes a big deal, and I do expect that by this time next year, we're talking about Evan Mobley as the best player on the Cavs. So I do think that is the biggest issue for Atlanta. Like if Jalen Johnson develops the way that the Hawks seem to think Jalen Johnson is going to develop, then Atlanta probably belongs higher up in the betting odds. And I'm betting on that a little bit by having them 3rd, but I would be at this point, I don't think anyone would be surprised if the Cavs or Knicks won the East next year. I think most people expect that to be the conference finals. Would I be surprised if Atlanta won the East next year? I would. I don't know that I'd be stunned, but I would certainly be surprised. And then the number 4 team I have in my Eastern Conference power rankings is the Orlando Magic. The Magic have been lauded as one of the winners of the offseason. And I think they got better, certainly. And I don't think that they are a team that is that was what the record was last year, just because of some of the injuries they had to Paulo Banchero, that they had to Franz Wagner, that they had to Jalen Suggs, that it was almost a lost season for the Magic because of all the injuries they dealt with. And that is certainly a bummer. So I expect them, just by virtue of health, to be a better team next year. And of course, they added Desmond Bane, who is a very good player. But the Orlando Magic do not have, in my opinion, enough perimeter creation for others. I think that if you look at Franz, he can score for himself. If you look at Paolo, he is one of, I think, the best isolation players in basketball. And he can get to the line and he can get to the rim seemingly at will. But I don't know that he can get others involved well enough. I'm just not sure that while I expect Orlando to be very good defensively, I'm not sure they're going to be able to score enough in the regular season or in the postseason to sort of justify being a potential NBA Finals type of favorite or an Eastern Conference Finals type of favorite. So I expect them to be better, and I would not be surprised to see the Magic in the second round of the playoffs next year. But I do look at them and say, I'm just not sure they're going to be able to score enough when push comes to shove in the playoffs. Now, could those four teams all win the Eastern Conference? Maybe. I think that there'd be varying levels of surprise. But how far down the power rankings do we go before we get to a team that we don't believe is capable of winning the East? We'll talk about that next right here on Locked On Cavs. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. If you'd like the show, do us a favor, subscribe on YouTube and make sure you hit the thumbs up button on this video. And of course, I've gone through the four teams I think are the nearest to the top of the East with the Cavs, Knicks, Hawks, and Magic. And then after that, I think everybody is a question mark to one extent or another. And it's easy, I think, to put Philadelphia in this fifth slot, and that's ultimately what I'm going to do. But I have a lot of questions about Philadelphia. When is Joel Embiid going to play? When is Paul George going to play? What is Jared McCain in year number 2 going to look like? VJ Edgecombe, we have no idea whether or not he's going to be great in the NBA, because you don't learn these things until guys actually get in the NBA. And I think I just keep coming back to with Philadelphia, I'm not going to believe in the 76ers until the 76ers make me believe in them. And I don't know if there's anything that they can do until Joel Embiid shows up in the second round of the playoffs in a healthy manner that's going to make me believe that the Philadelphia 76ers are a team that is capable of winning in the postseason. Do I think the Sixers are going to be better than they were last year? Absolutely. That's not difficult to do. But that is an organization that I would just continue and continue and continue to bet against until they prove me otherwise. I've got them fifth. And I think the line of where I would be very surprised as to whether or not teams are capable of winning the East, I think it's after 4. Because while Philly, maybe, like they are, I think, more talented than Atlanta and more talented than probably Orlando too, I need to see proof of concept in the actual playoffs before I'm willing to put that team above those two. And of course, those two teams haven't proven it either, but I'm willing to bet on the health of the other teams more than I'm willing to bet on the health of Joel Embiid. I don't know that he's ever going to look like the guy that won MVP a couple of years ago, because the injuries he's dealt with are no joke. So I've got them as number 5. Number 6, I have the Detroit Pistons. I think they are basically going to be the same team that they were last year. I would expect they're going to win between 42 and 46 games or so. They'll be out of the play-in, and they'll be a team that in all likelihood will lose in the first round. It's not necessarily a referendum on them. I just don't think that they necessarily tried to get much better this offseason. I think the Pistons viewed what they did last year as a year or two early, and they want to continue to see how some of their younger guys, like a Cade Cunningham, like an Asar Thompson, develop as basketball players. And I think that is the right path for them to go down. And this is where I think there is a big drop off. I think after 6, you look at the rest of the teams in the Eastern Conference, and it is really difficult, I think, to talk yourself into any of them. The Milwaukee Bucks are probably number 7 for me, which is wild because they have the best player in the conference in Giannis Antetokounmpo as of right now. But I don't know that Giannis is going to play for Milwaukee this year. I don't think That is firm. Would I be surprised if he's elsewhere? I would. But I don't think it's something that's been decided as of right now. I would bet that he will be in Milwaukee, but I wouldn't be stunned if he's not in Milwaukee. But the rest of that roster, and Miles Turner was a creative addition, but I just don't think that roster is very good. If you look at what their backcourt looks like right now, they're counting on Kevin Porter Jr., who he's a fine player. I don't think he's that much of an above average player, who of course has had several off the court issues, as we know very well in this town. Gary Trent Jr. is a fine shooter. But Cole Anthony, like that, just the backcourt, I think they have very limited perimeter creation. I think that they'll be good. I think they'll probably be fighting with the Pistons for the final playoff spot and out of the play-in. But it's really difficult for me to be talked into the Bucks having any sort of success in the postseason next year. And then I probably have the Boston Celtics there, because I don't think that the Boston Celtics are done making trades. I think that they're a team to watch to try and get all the way out of the tax, because they know they don't have title aspirations this year. They're going to get good play out of Jaylen Brown if he's healthy. Maybe Jason Tatum comes back at the end of the year. But this Celtics team is nowhere near what the Celtics have been the last couple of years. They are a team that I would expect is going to be fighting for a playoff spot, but they're not a real threat in the postseason either. I think the Indiana Pacers are going to not be in the playoffs next year because they don't have Tyrese Halliburton, because they didn't replace Miles Turner. They're going to play hard. They're going to play a fun style of basketball, but there is really no way for them to replace Tyrese Halliburton and everything that he does for that team. I would probably actually have the Miami Heat above them, and maybe even the Toronto Raptors above them. And none of those teams, in my opinion, are capable of winning the East. I could potentially see Miami and Toronto having good regular seasons and finding their way into the 6th seed. But ultimately, this all speaks to what I was trying to get to at the start of this episode. The Eastern Conference is not as wide open as everybody wants to make it seem. The Eastern Conference has a group of 2 teams that should be looked at as the favorites in the Cavs and the New York Knicks. And then there's another group of 2 teams that should be looked at as a dark horse candidate in the Orlando Magic and the Atlanta Hawks. And then Philadelphia sits alone as a team that, well, if everything goes right and Joel Embiid is finally able to play in the postseason, we can make a run. After that, nobody else in the conference is capable of it. And I've not talked about Chicago or Brooklyn or Washington or Charlotte, because guess what? Those teams, once again, are all going to stink because they have very bad rosters and they don't have a ton of talent. So that is where I have my Eastern Conference power rankings. I would love to know in the comments what your Eastern Conference power rankings look like. I imagine most of you will have the Cavs 1 or 2. And if you don't have them, at the very least, as the number 2 team in the East going into this season, I think you are overreacting quite a bit to what happened this postseason and not reacting enough to what the rest of this conference looks like. But thank you for making today's edition of Locked On Cavs your first listen. And thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. Make sure to drop us a 5-star rating, leave us a nice review, and of course, be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching the show on YouTube as we get out of here, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. I'll be back tomorrow talking more about the Cleveland Cavaliers.